This brings your total funding closer to $2 billion. How are you going to become a $1 trillion company?
Jensen says you need 1 million qubits. Satya knows you need big systems, etc., etc. I really worry that leadership at Google or Nvidia or whatever is completely misled about the impact of the technology and when it's going to come. Google has recently demonstrated really amazing systems of about 100 qubits. The general consensus is that you need more like 1 million qubits to do anything commercially impactful with a quantum computer.
So you've raised billions of dollars, but you don't yet have a product in the market.
Just look at the most consequential, durably valuable, strategically important, geopolitically significant companies of our age. TSMC, ASML, SpaceX, Nvidia, OpenAI. These companies are living or dying on the quality of their science, and they're all way out on the frontier. Boiling sulfuric acid, bleeding edge rocket engines, nanometer scale fabrication, 100 gigahertz networking, and very, very demanding bleeding edge science and engineering that is defining the frontier. Power is captured on the frontier.
There's one question you absolutely hate, but I'll save it for the end. Pete, welcome to Sorcery.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Who's us?
That is a British turn of phrase. People refer to themselves in the plural from time to time. Thanks for having me. It's really nice to be here.
Always a pleasure. Happy to. So we have a lot of ground to cover today. We're going to go deep into quantum.
Yep.
You have a big announcement we'll get into.
Mm-hmm.
There's one question you absolutely hate,
Yep.
and I'll be sure to ask it.
Brilliant.
I'm going to ask it at
That's
the
why
end,
I
though.
wouldn't expect anything less.
I know. It's like you tell me not to do something. We're going to do it. But I'll save it for the end so everybody can stick around.
Brilliant.
And then before we start, I have to say a thank you to Dr. Pri Narang from UCLA. She is one of the researchers there for physical sciences, and she's also an operating partner at DCBC. So thank you for the research help. Really appreciate it and very much needed it. So Pete, first, huge congratulations.
Thank you.
How did you raise $1 billion?
It's a great question. So, I came to Silicon Valley about 10 years ago now, moved here from the UK with the idea that we could build what is widely viewed as one of the most consequential technologies humans have ever come up with. And I half expected to be back on the plane, heading back to the UK 6 months later. And it's astonishing to me that we're still here and still kicking and that we're so incredibly well resourced. And I'm very grateful for that. We raised our Series D about 4 years ago now. We've spent a lot of that money to establish the manufacturing process for the systems that we're building. And then last year, we announced these major deals with the Australian government. So that's about $1 billion Australian deal for us to build a very large scale quantum computer in Brisbane. And then also that we would be the anchor tenant of a new $500 million quantum computing campus that's being built in Chicago. And so, on the back of that progress and the maturity that we've been able to achieve with the technology, we're just really excited now to be closing this round and to be heading towards actually building these really large systems that we need to unlock commercial applications of quantum computing.
With this round, what was the process like and who are the investors involved?
We're obviously firmly in the deep tech regime as a company. We've been around for a decade, so I've learned a lot about fundraising and so on in the Valley over the last 10 years or so. I don't think it was a particularly unusual fundraise, really. We've had, BlackRock, Baillie Gifford, Temasek are all involved in the round. And then we have a bunch of new investors also coming into the round. But a lot of familiar names from Silicon Valley, and then also some maybe slightly surprising late stage crossover type money that's coming into this funding round. I think it's nice to be doing it in a context where, a decade ago, when I said the words high performance computing or supercomputer or talked about a building sized machine, 10 years ago when people were doing apps, that was a deeply unpopular thing to talk about. HPC is from the 80s, don't talk to me about supercomputers. But of course, now we're doing that in a context where building a megawatt supercomputer is like child's play, and people are much more excited about hundreds of megawatts and gigawatts and whatever. So to be doing that, surrounded by the current excitement and also the kind of understanding and comprehension of these big AI systems has been pretty helpful to our process. Yeah.
This brings your total funding closer to $2 billion
In private capital, yeah.
in private capital, and I believe this is more than any other quantum computing company. So
That's right, to my knowledge, yeah.
what makes PsiQuantum different?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's sort of my job to explain this, and I endlessly iterate on how I explain the company. I think, it is striking. It's astonishing to me that, we have this support and that we've raised this money. I think as far as like how PsiQuantum is differentiated, it's helpful to understand that we sit on the far end of the spectrum in terms of targeting a really big machine. So quantum computing always is coming out of university research groups. In order to build a quantum computer, we need to use new physics. And that always starts with a research lab and demo systems and toy machines. And there have been quantum processors on the internet for more than a decade. I put one of the first systems online in the UK more than a decade ago, and that's 2 qubits. And Google has recently demonstrated really amazing, beautiful systems of about 100 qubits. The general consensus is that you need more like 1 million qubits to do anything commercially impactful with a quantum computer. And PsiQuantum is differentiated primarily in that we really took that to heart when we started the company. When you're a physicist in a lab and you think that you've come up with the way to build a quantum computer, it's very tempting to take your lab experiment and scale it up a bit and try and do some demos and make some press releases and publish some more papers, maybe raise a bit of venture capital, and sort of build an incremental path to what has to be a really big system. We just completely rejected that. So we just went fully 100% committed to realizing a very large machine. And so every investor that we've spoken to, every government that we've spoken to, the deal has basically been that if you give us money, we will spend that money exclusively on the technologies that are needed to get to a very, very large system that is actually commercially useful. And that's a provocative positioning. It's like an unpopular positioning with a whole group of very smart people, but there's obviously been enough people who understand why that makes sense and have been compelled by the progress that we've made and the technology that we've been able to show that they want to support that approach and that sort of philosophy. And yeah, I'm very, very glad that we've taken that approach. 10 years ago, there was sort of defensible optimism that small systems might be useful. And we took a risk in not pursuing like 100 qubits or 500 qubits or something. We just went all in on a giant system. 5-10 years later, that feels like a really good bet. And I think a helpful analogy is actually with flight or getting off of the ground. So you want to get off the ground, building ladders is a natural way to do it. And you can build a 10-foot ladder and your 20-foot ladder and so on. And then somebody comes and taps you on the shoulder and says, you got to get to the moon. And now ladders don't really look like the right way to do it. And so what we've been doing is investing in a rocket engine. And to build a new rocket engine, you got to spend hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, your rocket engine doesn't even fly. It doesn't get off of the ground. You do tests that are, stuck to the earth. But that's a good use of capital if the goal is ultimately to get to the moon. And so that's kind of how we've operated. We've invested in the semiconductor manufacturing, in the networking, in the cooling, in all of the technology that we need to deliver a 1 million qubit machine. And we haven't spent any of our resources on like taking a 20 qubit processor, sticking it online, letting people play around with that. We decided not to do that.
So instead of incrementalism, we're going straight to being an N of 1 million qubits company.
Yes. And to be clear, we have intermediate milestones scattered along the roadmap to that big system. And to me, it looks a lot more like how you build a conventional, like leadership class supercomputer. So, we count qubits, right? And it's sort of natural to think about building a 5-qubit system and then a 10-qubit system and then a 50-qubit system. But if you follow that path to 1,000,000 qubits, that's like a multi-decade trajectory that looks very unattractive. And that's not how people build leadership class supercomputers. They don't build a 5-transistor and then a 20-transistor and so on, right? What they do is they establish the manufacturing process for the chip. They go and figure out the networking. They go and develop the cooling. Eventually, they put one rack in a building somewhere, bring it up, debug it. Then they go and put 10 racks together, gives them all sorts of headaches. They debug that system. And eventually, they go and put 100 plus racks into a building. And that's, as much as possible, that's really how we're approaching the roadmap and the staging. And we're clear that none of that is useful until you get to that final very large scale machine.
I think like many people over and over again will be saying, oh, it's 5 years away, it's
Yeah.
10 years away, it's et cetera, et cetera. Jensen Huang even was quoted saying he thinks quantum will be 15 to 30 years out. Not long after, he actually backtracked on that when he realized that there are quantum public companies.
Yep.
And now he's getting involved. In particular, he's mentioned in this round. So how did he become strategic to PsiQuantum, and how are you working together?
Yeah, so quantum computing is definitely in that list of technologies where it's like very understandable that people say, oh, it's always 5 years away, it's science fiction, whatever. And if you look at what Jensen said, he was asked about this kind of off the cuff, unexpected, and I think he, threw back an answer that to me is a pretty reasonable answer. And I think he's probably right on average on that timeline. If you look at exactly what he said in that call, it's pretty helpful. Firstly, he starts by saying, you need 1,000,000 qubits. So he starts by saying that. This is, of course, left out of the quotes in media. But first of all, I'm grateful for that. Like, quantum computing is a space with a lot of hype, a lot of confusion, a ton of noise. I worry that because of all of that hype and because it's a pretty involved, challenging field to understand, I really worry that like leadership at Google or Nvidia or whatever is completely misled about the impact of the technology and when it's going to come and all this kind of stuff. Pretty encouraging to see, like Jensen says, you need 1,000,000 qubits. Satya knows you need big systems, et cetera, et cetera. And then he says, so Google's got 100 qubits. You need about 1,000,000 qubits. That's 10,000x scale up. And then from that, he sort of leaps to, that's a multi-decade, sounds like a multi-decade exercise for humans to scale a technology by 10,000x, which is a sort of rational way of thinking. And I was very grateful to have the opportunity to put the counterpoint to him at GTC earlier this year, which is that he himself has proven how you scale by 10,000x in 112 days. So the XAI Colossus supercomputer, Elon Musk and team famously built a 100,000 GPU cluster in 112 days, which is a miracle, right? Like 100,000 GPUs in 100 days. It's astonishing that we can do this. How can we do that? It's thanks to the $1 trillion and 50 years that our species has put into the semiconductor industry, and the fact that we can make tens of thousands of wafers, billions of devices, that there's this enormous supply chain to build these parts in, and it's here where we're sitting in playgrounds. Early on, I was really lucky to see people do this with cell phones. People look at us and they say, you're trying to build 1,000,000 qubits. This is like fantasy land. You can't scale like that. These guys here, when I first showed up, they had a cell phone this big. They had like a big PCB covered in parts with like a screen hanging off the front. The next year, they go to TSMC, Foxconn, Sanmina, Kyocera, etc., all of the usual suspects of the semiconductor industry supply chain, and they place an order for 100,000 cell phones. And you'd be shocked if those cell phones don't show up working the next year, right? Like you can do that kind of scaling so long as you can fit yourself into the constraints of the semiconductor industry. And that was really our founding thesis, the only reason that we could afford to make that really extreme bet that we're going to go straight to 1 million qubits, the only reason that we felt that was plausible is that our technology fits into the fabs and the OSATs and the contract manufacturers who are building millions of devices for the semiconductor industry every year. And so that gave us kind of the confidence and the leverage to believe in that trajectory. And yeah, hopefully that registered with Jensen, given his experience of that same industry.
How is Nvidia getting involved?
Yeah, so we are actually working with Nvidia on a whole bunch of different tracks. They have a quantum computing effort. They have CUDA-Q and a whole bunch of really nice software. They're also working on some of the hardware pieces, not the qubits themselves. And Nvidia have been pretty explicit that they're not building a quantum computer, but they do see a whole bunch of opportunities to contribute to the ecosystem. And then they're also having a look at some of the byproducts, basically, of our development. We make some of the best photonics in the world, and that's pretty relevant for networking and AI supercomputers. So up until recently, people have lent heavily on copper wires to network these AI supercomputers. That's becoming untenable as we get to these really huge systems. And so optics is increasingly playing a role. And there's a few people actually who are taking a look at the photonics that we've developed that is beyond state of the art in performance. But yeah, we're just really, really excited about the engagement with NVIDIA. They've obviously decided to take a leadership position in this space. They're deadly serious about it. And I think they're taking a sort of pretty measured approach to the whole thing. So obviously, legendary company. I think it's kind of interesting that Jensen's trajectory is the opposite of ours, in that they really grew that over decades from something very small, incrementally revenue generating, et cetera, to obviously the scale that they are now. It's kind of fun to reflect on the fact that they used to sell, and this isn't meant to be derogatory, it's just meant to make a point. Like, they used to be a toy company, right? Like, they used to sell gaming hardware, and then they transitioned to selling H100s by the bucket loads. And now they are a supercomputer company. Like, if you had told people this, I think 10 years ago, a lot of VCs, they wouldn't have believed you that the world's biggest company would be a scientific computing company that sells supercomputers as their main product. I'm only stretching the definition a little bit when I say that, right? Like, the majority of NVIDIA's revenue is now for giant supercomputers that are mostly operated by scientists, and that's multi-trillion-dollar company. And then it's also like inspirational to me when I hear inevitably these kind of comments. Quantum computing is 10 years away, it's some gobbledygook science fiction stuff. Just to think about the trajectory that AI has been on, right? Like, AI was essentially a failed field multiple times in its trajectory. It went through multiple winters. DARPA defunded it, UK government defunded it, and it had the same reputation. Bunch of scientists, I can't understand what they're saying, and they keep failing to deliver on their promises. And it was really the convergence of two things, to my mind. The availability of hardware that was built for another purpose, in this case, gaming GPUs, and then also progress on the architecture, where I see very strong parallels between what we've done and what has happened with transformers and attention and so on. Those two things coming together can really sneak up on you. And I think that's what happened with AI. And I obviously am biased, but I see very strong parallels with quantum computing.
Sorcery is brought to you by Brex, the financial stack trusted by more than 30,000 companies, including 1 in 3 venture-backed startups in the US. Nearly 40% of startups fail because they run out of cash. Brex is literally built to help founders avoid that. Unlike traditional banks that let your money sit idle, chipping away at it with fees, Brex is designed to help you spend smarter and move faster. Their all-in-one solution combines checking, treasury, and FDIC protection into one powerful account. You can send and receive money globally at lightning speeds, get 20 times the standard FDIC coverage through their partner banks, and even high yield from day one. With same day and even same hour liquidity, access your funds anytime. companies like Scale AI, DoorDash, ServiceTitan, Hims, Anthropic, Flexport, Robinhood, and Plaid trust and use Brex. Start today at brex.com/sorcery. That's BREX.com/sorcery. Okay, so I have a really hard question for you.
Please.
Are you ready for this?
Mm-hmm.
I figured, why save all the hard questions for the end? I'll just start with one of them.
Yeah.
How are you going to become a $1 trillion company?
Are you're just trying to provoke my
Yes.
my emotions halfway through, get it warmed up a little bit?
Oh, we are going to go on a roller coaster of
Okay, great.
emotions here.
I love it.
Mhm.
Yeah. So how are we going to become a $1 trillion company? So I think, like, again, it's surprising to me that I still have to that I still sometimes struggle to get this across. Like, you look at quantum computing. I work on quantum computing. People say it's science fiction, it's like fantasy land stuff, it belongs in a research lab. Why would the Fortune 100 or the NASDAQ or a late stage investor or BlackRock, care about quantum computing? And it's baffling to me that people ask this question, because just look at the most consequential, durably valuable, strategically important, geopolitically significant companies of our age: TSMC, ASML, SpaceX, Nvidia, right? These companies, OpenAI, these companies are living or dying on the quality of their science. And they're all on the frontier, like way out on the frontier, boiling sulfuric acid and, bleeding edge rocket engines and nanometer scale fabrication and, 100 gigahertz networking. And, this is like very, very demanding bleeding edge science and engineering that is defining the frontier, that's having huge geopolitical impact, and that is illustrating to me a sort of trend that humanity seems to be on, where power is captured on the frontier. And those companies are valuable almost by definition, or like almost as a consequence of the fact that they're doing something so technically difficult that nobody else can do it. There's basically only one TSMC, there's one ASML, there's one SpaceX, there's one Nvidia. And so we have a clear ambition to earn our place in that list of companies. And then to make it concrete, like, how does that actually become money? Look at the Fortune 100. I don't know what you visualize when I say Fortune 100. And so I typed Fortune 100 into an AI image generator. Just type Fortune 100 and you get an image of men in suits shaking hands with each other. That's what the AI thinks the Fortune 100
white
is.
too.
Yeah. Men in suits shaking hands. That's and I think probably a bunch of people, when you say Fortune 100, like, that's what they picture.
Mhm.
Either maybe a list or, bunch of blokes shaking hands. That's the Fortune 100, right? And no, car companies, materials companies, energy companies, pharmaceutical companies, semiconductor companies. These are giant industries with huge sales teams and enormous revenue, but they all sit on a microscopic foundation of chemistry, physics, and math, whether that is the drug molecule, the fuel, the catalyst, the fertilizer, the semiconductor manufacturing process. And I like to visualize this sort of inverted pyramid where the whole thing is sitting on atoms and molecules and reactions. And it's really true. And what's exciting is that those microscopic foundations are massively overdue for reinvention. Like, they're clearly not fit for purpose. Decarbonization and competitiveness and supply chains and all sorts of headaches that mean that we want new fertilizers, new fuels, new drugs, whatever. Currently, our ability to innovate at that microscopic foundation is profoundly limited because we cannot simulate those things. Our conventional supercomputers suck at predicting the properties of these microscopic things. And that happens to be exactly the set of problems where a quantum computer is perfectly suited, and where we will solve problems that can never be solved by any conventional supercomputer that you could ever build. And, we're living in this world where Mark Zuckerberg is posting pictures of a Manhattan-sized supercomputer, which is simultaneously thrilling to me, right? Like, it's cool, given our ambitions, to be surrounded by people who are, thinking the same way. But it's also kind of worrying for humanity that cannot continue. Like, unless you're a full-on Dyson sphere person, which you might be, Molly. Are you a Dyson sphere person?
I'm not going to reveal that.
Not going to reveal the position on Dyson sphere?
Mm-mm.
Okay, well, I need a bit of persuading on the Dyson sphere myself. I think a Manhattan-sized supercomputer is, let's put it this way, it is likely the end of the road. Like, it seems difficult to me that you can indefinitely progress beyond Manhattan-sized supercomputers. There are people very seriously trying to pave that path, but I think there is profound risk ultimately in that direction. And so, yeah, we're offering an opportunity to go and capture virgin territory that will otherwise remain forever unexplored. And that happens to be problems that underpin, our entire economy. So, how can we become a trillion-dollar company? It's by being the only company on the planet with a categorically new level of mastery over chemistry, physics, and math. If we can dramatically accelerate our ability to innovate on drugs, molecules, fuels, catalysts, fertilizers, semiconductors, etc. And by the way, a string of things that we don't even know we want yet, but that we're going to find with this machine. If we can then go and actually vertically integrate on top of that fountain of knowledge that we're going to build in Australia and in Chicago, I think there's a pretty serious prospect that we do earn our place in that list of legendary companies. And it's bloody difficult, but it's definitely possible. And so that's why I've spent the last 10 years in pursuit of it, and will continue to do so.
One of the undercurrents of the stories that you've mentioned and the examples is obviously a lot of the momentum that we're seeing with AI. It's unlocking new territories, it's creating new inflection points, it's even bringing back nuclear. Who would have thought we would have really made so much of an effort there? I interviewed Scott Nolan of General Matter because they're creating a uranium enrichment company. Guess what? Uranium enrichment in the US, it's like less than 0.1%. It's crazy. It's like, it's really not there. So there's like these new inflection points popping up. And the way that quantum is being positioned, especially like in this era, is against this new wave of compute. It's like a third wave of compute. So how do you see quantum positioned within this new wave of compute and like very competitive AI?
To my eyes, and I'm biased as a physicist and given what I do with my life and so on, but to my eyes, it really does look like humans are on this monotonic trajectory where they're reaching for more and more extreme technologies, right? Like smaller and smaller transistors beyond the diffraction limit, down to 3 nanometers and unthinkable scale. Going after nuclear power, going after fusion, building Manhattan-sized supercomputers. Like, to me, humans are just reaching and reaching for these extreme technologies. Quantum computing is obviously an example of that. As far as how we fit into the AI and supercomputing piece, let me talk about kind of the bridge into the future, and then maybe I'll talk about how those two technologies kind of interact with each other. I think we need a bridge to the future, unless we do Dyson spheres, which I don't rule out, and just manage and enable fusion in the next few years and have infinite resources and so on. Like, barring that situation, I think we need a bridge that gets us out of otherwise quite a dire situation where we run out of power, run out of space, and run out of data. We've already consumed the vast majority of language data that is on the internet. People are going to go and mine videos for a few years, but I think there is a risk, put it that way, that quantum computing helps to mitigate. A single million qubit quantum computer would outperform the net total of conventional computing on the entire planet. So you take all of the supercomputers on the planet, you take every AWS system, every Azure system, you add them all together, and we trash that capability for that specific set of problems in chemistry, material science, etc. And so that's helpful. Like that's a 100 megawatt kind of system. It's a single building. It's pretty ugly, but it is clearly giving us a bridge beyond otherwise a kind of cliff that I think we risk hitting with this linear scale up of conventional supercomputers. And then as far as the way these things interact, one of the things that we're most excited about is to use the quantum computer to produce training data that we can then feed to conventional machine learning systems. So with machine learning AI, it's been incredibly successful at making approximations that are learned from data. That's basically what AI does. A quantum computer is sort of complementary and diametrically opposed in a sense, in that it is making exact calculations from first principles. So like when we add 2 and 2 and get 4, we didn't learn that from data. That's just like first principles thinking. That's really what a quantum computer does. And with that, we should be able to generate extremely precise data in otherwise unexplored territory of chemical space, of material space, and use that data to train a conventional machine learning system. I think through that kind of mechanism, we can produce a wholesale upgrade of our mastery of those things, and then go and use that without having to touch the quantum computer. Then you can go and actually exploit those models on a regular GPU. We're really excited about that prospect.
In today's high-speed business world, staying ahead means using the smartest tools possible, including the powerful capabilities of artificial intelligence. Meet Turing Intelligence. Turing builds customizable AI systems designed to solve your mission-critical challenges, no matter your industry. From expert guidance to tailored projects, Turing helps top companies realize AI that's more capable, more adaptable, and more effective. With Turing, discover how AI can accelerate your business growth. To learn more, visit turing.com/sorcery, spelt SOURCERY. That's turing.com/sorcery. Do you think that AI will help accelerate these quantum timelines? Chad Rigetti, actually, of the famous Rigetti
Yes.
company that is publicly traded, he just recently started a new company to take advantage of the new architectures. So how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so PsiQuantum is pretty contrarian on a few things. Like my life over the last decade probably would have been easier if I had just taken that chip I had in Bristol, put it online and made it available to people and then tried to raise money off of that. Instead, we said, no, you need to go straight to 1 million qubits and I need $1 billion to do it and so on. I'm also pretty contrarian on this AI stuff. So I think probably there's a good fraction of this audience who would love to hear me say, thanks to AI, now we can have the quantum computer much sooner. You're going to clip that. I know you are.
I will. I definitely will.
But
I'll take it out of context too.
So like, what is PsiQuantum, right? PsiQuantum is a Silicon Valley startup company, but secretly we're a 1980s Silicon Valley chip company. And a big chunk of our DNA and our center of mass is a semiconductor chip company. Like where we spend most of the money is making silicon wafers in a fab in Global Foundries in upstate New York. And I have learned over the last decade, like the semiconductor chip industry is incredibly conservative. It's because if you tape out, if you send designs to the fab that are wrong, you don't find out for 6 months and it completely ruins your life. And so the extent to which we actually use new stuff is incredibly low. We basically don't use AI at all inside the company to design chips. And I think if you go and look at people who are building millions of chips in industry, there's a very small amount of AI, if any, that's being involved in the actual design of those chips today. It's a pretty boring, like old school, gray and kind of ancient practice to design and make these chips really work as intended. So I like that. I think it's cool. Like we're kind of building these chips in a very, very traditional old school way. And that is honestly how the semiconductor industry operates, apart from a few little frothy news stories that you see from time to time. So no, I don't think that AI is going to dramatically reduce our timelines. Currently, our timelines are mostly determined, as far as I can tell, by infrastructure, right? We're breaking ground on these sites in Australia and Chicago. These are roughly 100 megawatt, multi-100 thousand square foot sites. We've got to put about 100 tons of hardware onto the ground to make helium on those sites. That's a multi-year exercise to stand up that helium liquefier for those machines. And so, like, none of that is accelerated by AI. That's accelerated by digging faster, laying concrete faster, cutting metal faster. And there's a limit to how far you can go with that. So I think actually it's probably the other way around. It's that, we have technologies as a byproduct of what we've done at PsiQuantum that I'm pretty optimistic can be helpful in building next generation AI supercomputers, in mitigating some of the frightening prospects that are otherwise faced with power and so on. And then ultimately, I want the quantum computer to produce data that is fed into an AI supercomputer. But yeah, that's an unpopular answer. We barely use AI inside the company to do this chip design, at least. Yeah.
Contrarian take.
Yeah.
We love that.
We do use it for the decoder. So there's, there are limited pieces where it's really, really impactful. So for instance, the system that runs the quantum error correcting code, it's a good example, actually, of the sort of the surreptitious nature of these technologies where they're fantasy until they're not. I like to point at self-driving cars as well in this respect. Even like 5 years ago, VCs would laugh when I said self-driving. Like they would say, self-driving fantasy, never going to happen. They'll get some demo working, but the idea of a fleet of Waymos driving across San Francisco with literally nobody behind the wheel is just, you're very naive. You have no experience. I've seen this before. It's never going to happen. And suddenly it's real.
Now they only want to take a Waymo.
Now those same people say, I never want to see somebody in the driver's seat ever again. Like with quantum computing 7 years ago, that decoder piece, which runs the error correcting code, people would tell ghost stories where they would say, the decoder is going to kill you. The decoder needs this, multi-gigawatt supercomputer to actually run that conventional logic that's just fixing errors in the machine. And over the last 5 or 6 years, those estimates have come down precipitously. And that's partly because of new approaches based on neural decoders that have been really, really successful. So yeah, there are pieces of the machine where AI is definitely going to be critically important for the success of the thing. But I like the component where most of our chip development would be completely recognizable to somebody from the 1980s.
We're going to get into chip development a little bit further, but while I still have you at the start, you're going to get another big question. Okay, so you've raised billions of dollars, pretty much billions at this point, but you don't yet have a product in the market.
Yeah.
Why should the public believe in PsiQuantum's vision?
Let me not answer the question, and then I'll answer the question, if that's okay. So the non-answer is that, again, many of the most consequential companies of our time are not used by the public. So what happens inside TSMC, what happens in an ASML EUV machine, programming a 100,000 GPU Nvidia cluster, operating a Raptor engine from SpaceX, or designing a payload that's going to go on a launch. These are incredibly esoteric activities. It's really striking to me that these enormous companies that everyone nods their heads and agrees are legendary, the people who use those companies, the end user for those technologies, or the direct interaction, at least, with that technology, is an incredibly small number of scientists, basically. How many people on the planet can operate an ASML EUV machine or design a payload for SpaceX or whatever? It's really an esoteric activity that is running that's fueling these companies. quantum computing is the same, right? Like most people will never program a quantum computer. Most people will never directly interact with a quantum computer, and that is fine. And that is how our economy seems to be operating at the moment. That's the first thing to say, which is this is not a mass adoption technology. But then, yeah, the spirit of the question is very understandable, which is you've raised all this money. How do we know that you're not full of crap, basically? And so there's a whole variety of pieces of machinery that get deployed there. Firstly, of course, people do diligence on us. We know a huge fraction of the academic community who have come and examined the status of our technology, asked us a lot of questions, come to our labs, seen our data. In the case of the Australian government, they looked at 24 companies in that process. The chief scientist of Australia at the end of that. Well, it was funny. There was actually media coverage of that in which there was I think freedom of information or similar kind of request. They dug up a bunch of emails in that Australian process. And one of the first emails from the chief scientist says that she's very skeptical of our approach. So this was a news story in Australia, chief scientist highly skeptical of PsiQuantum approach at the outset. To which I'm like, what do you want? You want her to be like highly credulous on day one and say, I love this? No, you want her to be highly skeptical at the outset. And then at the end of that, 18-month process, she concludes that we're a country mile ahead of anyone else. And obviously there's risk, and you can never make these things black and white, but that was a very, very in-depth process. They came to the lab, they came and measured our devices, they came and looked over our shoulder and watched us reproduce these measurements. That's a level of scrutiny that no academic journal has ever done in my experience. Like they never physically come to the lab and look over your shoulder. And then, probably the biggest exercise that has been done to look at our technology from a third party perspective has been DARPA. If I were like a member of the public paying taxes, which I am, I would be pretty frustrated by some of the sort of approach that's often taken to quantum computing, where people say it's a strategic priority, it's the future, and then governments just kind of hand money to companies. They say, we love quantum computing's awesome, here's some taxpayer money. And I'd be sitting there thinking, well, they haven't proven anything, they don't have a product, they've been talking about this quantum computing crap for years. I don't like the sound of this very much. And DARPA did something really nice, which is they did the opposite. They said, DARPA is going to start from the assumption that quantum computing doesn't work. Nobody's got any idea how to build one. They're full of crap on their timelines. And even if they could build it, it wouldn't actually be useful. It wouldn't do anything worthwhile. That was DARPA's starting assumption. And then they took 50 scientists and engineers and told them, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but I don't think it's a terribly far from reality, that they told those people, your job is to kill quantum computing companies. Like your job is to go and talk to all of these guys, and your success will be measured on how many of those you can shut down. I mean, I'm paraphrasing, but it's not that far from what they did, which is awesome, right? Because so now DARPA have, as I said, come and measured our devices. They've spent an enormous amount of time with our team over the course of many years. And if you go and talk to DARPA people today, they will not say, PsiQuantum has a 100% chance of success. There is no doubt in my mind. We can prove that they're going to be successful, etc. But what they can say is, we've had 50 people trying to kill this thing for years. We've been in their buildings. We've talked to their people. We've taken a sort of red team position on their approach, and we still have not killed them. And they have just graduated to the final phase of our program. They're one of 2 companies to have reached that point. And that to me is like a really serious way of dealing with a frontier technology like this, right? Like I'm obviously biased as to the prospects of success and so on and so on. And it's really welcome to have a serious, qualified bunch of people come and do that kind of red team exercise on what we're doing. And I'm very proud of our team who've made it through to the end of that. But yeah, like we're obviously a deep tech company. We're obviously a 0 to 1 kind of technology. There are a lot of examples of companies who've raised a hell of a lot more money than us in a similar kind of situation, not in quantum computing, but in kind of similar technologies. And I just think it's exciting that Silicon Valley and the world is still doing this kind of thing, like, and actually seems to be increasingly understanding that that you got to do this kind of stuff, that you've got to push the frontier. I think it's good.
One thing that's just so fascinating with all of this is that there are so many quantum companies,
Yeah,
and there's so many public quantum companies too. Like,
yeah,
who would have thought you could just like take your pick out of like 5, 6 stocks, but they all kind of like took the window,
yeah.
did a SPAC thing, and they're still around.
Hmm.
In terms of that, how do you justify these public valuations? How do you justify private or public valuations for frontier tech?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not going to justify the valuations of my competitors. I'm a scientist, but uh, yeah, there's tons of companies. If I were an observer of this field, I'd be really frustrated just by the endless competitive positioning that goes on. Every founder like me will come and talk to you and tell you why their technology is the best,
Hmm.
and everybody else's technology sucks and it's awful. And like journalists and investors and government people are endlessly frustrated with this kind of stuff, and I would be frustrated too. I think it's probably like I wasn't there for it, but I imagine this is how memory technologies went in the sort of 90s in Silicon Valley. So there were people running around with different physical implementations of memory for conventional computing, and um, and all arguing in favor of one
Yeah.
particular approach. And then, from my point of view, at least, it tends to be that is much more of a filter than a race. If you look at what we do with transistors, if we look at what we do with SRAM, if you look at all sorts of these kind of hard physical technology um, like landscapes, they tend to concentrate into one or two leading approaches. Um, but yeah, on valuations, I mean, again, I think to be sympathetic to these high valuations, uh, if you can do it, you earn your place in that list, right? Like TSMC, ASML, SpaceX, Nvidia, like you earn your place in that list, and they're not there yet. Nobody is. Nobody has a useful quantum computer. But all of these teams are seriously believing that they can get to that kind of stage. I think probably the way I would put it is just that you got to judge the risk on that, right? Like, ultimately, are they on a trajectory that can end with world domination and multi-hundred-billion-dollar valuations and so on? Yeah, I think that there is a serious prospect that these companies do that, but there is a much greater chance that they go to zero, is basically my simple way of putting it. If people want to bet on that, that's cool. I would say don't listen to anybody who produces a little table of the pros and cons of their own technology, where the check marks are all in their own column, and then you put crosses in everybody else's column. These tables somehow are very persuasive to people, and I think they're really stupid. I think better questions are again like with the understanding that you need a giant system to solve commercially useful problems. If I were looking at quantum computing companies, I would be asking, in addition to, peer-reviewed academic literature on the qubit, the gate, the fidelity, all of that kind of stuff, like the basic properties of the technology, there's a bunch of questions that kind of go missing, which is like, who is your fab? Who is your contract manufacturer? Where are you getting power? Where are you getting water? Where is the plot of land where you're going to build this system? Has a government spent a few years diligencing you? Did they give you serious capital at the end of that process? Who's your building contractor? These are necessary but not sufficient questions, but they tend to get completely lost in this honestly kind of silly arguing over ions versus superconducting qubits versus photons versus whatever. That stuff is really important, but it's a small piece of the puzzle of building a data center sized machine.
One of the things I've been listening to public market analysts on this is the business fundamentals.
Yeah.
And, you can look at PE ratios, you can look at all these different
Yeah.
things, EBITDA, blah, blah, blah. Some of them are looking at their cash positions. I'm like, like, really? I don't know if like cash positions is really like the great measure here. But a critical question below all of that is the revenue drivers.
Yeah.
And so how are you going to be making revenue? How are
Yeah.
all these other companies making revenue along the way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's unfortunate that people like me, who are scientists, who end up founding these companies and having leadership positions in these companies, we get coached that there is a certain way to do a venture-backed company. And the coaching is very often, you got to get some kind of revenue by any means necessary really early. And that's certainly true if you're a SaaS company, right? Like if I'm building a SaaS company, I better go and produce some early revenues. But what happens with quantum computing is that it motivates people to go and twist themselves into knots, trying to produce revenues with a machine that is categorically not useful. And that is kind of what has been going on in quantum computing, right? Like that 2-qubit chip that I had in Bristol 10 years ago, it had a web API, people could sign in, they could run code. I could have started charging people for that, right? Like a few $1,000 a shot or something, and people would have paid for it. And it would create the impression that I'm on some incremental trajectory of revenue, where that machine can be simulated by a pocket calculator on a laptop. It's a completely useless machine. And so the appropriate thing with quantum computing is to face up to the unpleasant reality, which is that this is a 0 to 1 technology, like self-driving, right? Like Waymo is, I think, a pretty good example here. Waymo is a useless company until they cross that threshold, until they got that fleet and it's really working. And then you look at them and say, my God, these guys are going to dominate every major city in the world, right? And unless Tesla comes for them. But, they're now they transition from enormous upfront capital, like way more than anything we're planning for. They transition from that to something really compelling and exciting pretty fast. So it's important with quantum computing to understand, like, you are on the far end of the spectrum in that respect. Get comfortable with it. Don't pretend that you're a SaaS company or some incremental type of technology. You have to own the reality of what you're doing. And then how are we going to make money? So we are basically hell-bent on getting to that very large system as fast as humanly possible. And that is the promise that we've made to investors, to governments, etc. That capital, that time is only going to be spent to get to a really useful machine as fast as humanly possible. Once that machine comes online, we're not going to sell it. Selling a 100,000 square foot system is dangerous and stupid, is probably how I'd put it. Selling time on it is like really natural, right? Like you want to sign in, run some code on the machine, we can charge people to do that. And again, you should sort of visualize this thing as a fountain of knowledge, as a machine, an oracle that can answer questions about chemistry, material science, etc., that no other system on the planet can answer. We expect that people will pay serious money. When, currently they might spend $1 billion over a decade to bring a new drug to market. They might be doing incredibly intensive trial and error development of new electrolytes for lithium-ion batteries. There's enormous waste and time and overhead currently involved in these kind of processes. And so I think that's driving the appetite with our commercial customers that we have today to prepare for the existence of that machine. And so you can build a nice Excel spreadsheet, right, where you model selling time on that system in a kind of cloud computing framing like Azure or AWS or whatever. And you can pretty quickly convince yourself that will be a very lucrative machine when we turn that system on. However, I look at that and I say, I've just spent my entire adult life trying to bring about an oracle that, gives us a glimpse into virgin territory that we will otherwise never access. And I think, why are we, why are we selling that in its raw form, right? Like, why are we just not capitalizing on that ourselves? And so I get a little bit into deranged founder territory here, but I think there is, you look at that thing and you say, why would we not hire drug discovery people, hire material scientists, hire chemists, and start to actually exploit the knowledge and information that's coming out of that machine, exploit that directly, build something that is more vertically integrated. We're not about to build Pfizer on top of a quantum computing company overnight, but we can definitely take steps in that direction. And that, I think, is how you build a company the likes of which the world has never seen before, a legendary, generationally significant company, is through that kind of little bit more vertical integration.
What would be the main value drivers of potential customers, and who are your customers now?
I think it's helpful just to think about what is currently done with conventional computing, and especially what's currently done with AI. When I look at language models as an outsider, I see those language models sort of consuming territory really quick, right? Like, they're getting stronger and stronger, and they're starting to take over things that people have been doing either with human beings or with regular computing at a very fast rate. But we also know there's a limit to that. Like, that kind of expansion of territory will stop at a boundary where the stuff on the other side of that boundary is for us, from my point of view, right? Like, we're going to go after the stuff that people don't do with language models, etc. And as far as we're concerned, the low-hanging fruit is really materials and chemistry. That's where so we have about a 50-person applications team who engage with car companies, materials companies, energy companies, etc., to prepare them for the existence of that big machine. And a lot of that work is on small molecule drug discovery, catalysts, basically small, hard molecular or like reaction chemistry, material science problems. When you talk about quantum computing, people sort of tend to list the same categories of application, and that's one of them. They often talk about optimization problems. They often talk about quantum machine learning. And then the one that always comes up, like the elephant in the room, is code breaking. And I think we'll probably touch on code breaking. But our view on optimization is that it's really difficult to do like tremendously impactful optimization with a quantum computer. Conventional computers are already surprisingly good at optimization. And the quantum algorithms that we know of for optimization problems have some bugs, basically. Like, they're pretty painful to make them useful. So the jury's out is sort of how I'd put it on optimization. We're a little pessimistic on that piece. Quantum machine learning is really nice to think about. It sounds awesome in like a press release. It's really early is how I put it. Like, the development of the theory is not yet at a stage where you can confidently say quantum computing is going to be awesome for accelerating machine learning models or something like that. You cannot say that at this point. There are sort of reasonable reasons to be excited, and there's some glimmers of excitement. That needs a lot more work. We do a lot of work on partial differential equations, which is jargon, obviously, but underlies a huge fraction of things that people do in financial industry, fluid dynamics, in aerospace. All sorts of stuff is sitting on PDEs. And we have some pretty exciting work on that piece. And then I think we'll come to code breaking. But yeah, the sort of macro picture that I think is helpful is that language models are going to eat language and coding and stuff like that. And then there's this whole territory of like the physical world, basically, that we're going to go after and that we think will remain mostly off limits.
One thing that you've mentioned a couple of times is the construction and the value where you think there's actual weight behind these companies.
Yeah.
For PsiQuantum in particular, you have the Chicago site, you have Australia.
Yeah.
You are starting to break ground, and we're going to do a tour on this on your, I don't know how to say it.
South Bay.
We'll just go
Milpitas.
with, okay, we'll just
Yeah.
go with South Bay because I keep on messing up the name of
Yeah.
that. Milpitas.
Milpitas, yeah.
Yeah. You've set up shop in America. Actually, before that,
Yeah.
talk about those sites because I know each one of them is like completely different in like, I don't want to give it away.
Okay. You want just a map of the world?
No. Because like what I'm trying to get at is like you built the Australian one
Yeah.
on an airport. The
Yeah.
Chicago one is an old steel mill.
Yeah.
Like, could you just break down how each of these sites you
Yeah.
strategically found like the best possible place to build?
Yeah. So I wanted to make a drawing, but I
Here's some paper.
yeah, I'll save you that. Yeah, so I'm British. Everyone thinks I'm Australian. That's because
Wait, you're not?
no, I'm British.
You're British?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what my girlfriend does when we talk about England. She goes,
Cold place, warm place.
Yeah. We started out in the UK, but my two co-founders are Australian, and they were working in Australia, in Brisbane, prior to that.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the foundational work on optical quantum computing specifically was done in Australia like 20, 25 years ago. And there are just a few nations and like specific parts of the world that were early in investing in quantum computing. So UK, Australia, US, obviously, Chicago specifically has a really, really strong concentration of quantum computing stuff specifically. And that's partly because of their history, national labs, first sustained nuclear reaction, et cetera, great universities. But yeah, we did the basic research in the UK for a decade at the University of Bristol and Imperial College. We now have a lab in the north of England, which is a decommissioned synchrotron accelerator. It's a UK government lab, and that happens to have a big helium liquefier that we can use to run test systems. We're not building a quantum computer in the UK at the moment, but we do have that R&D site that's been incredibly productive for us. We're very grateful to UK government for some funding there. Headquarters is currently in California, so we're based in Palo Alto. Up until about 9 months ago, our main lab for the whole company was 10,000 square feet of former conference rooms, basically. So 9 months ago, we had raised $750 million. We were a few hundred people, and we were like crammed into this 10,000 square foot space where we've like ripped out the whiteboards and the coffee machines and put in like 300 millimeter wafer tester, like classic Silicon Valley. You walk through the front door and expect that it's like a crappy lawyer's office, and then it's like full of silicon wafers and liquid helium and cryostats and whatever. We still have that space, but it's way too small for us. And so now we've moved to the South Bay. We've got 140,000 square foot of space in this new building. We've got 40,000 square feet of former Class 10 cleanroom space. That building used to have 10 megawatts of power to it. Currently, we're down to a megawatt. We'll go back up to 10 megawatts. And my shorthand on what that building is doing is that it's the Foxconn of quantum computing. So our whole approach is to leverage existing fabs and contract manufacturers and so on. But that building is doing the exceptions to that rule. So where we have to do our own materials production or our own assembly, that kind of assembly line and cleanroom space is here in the South Bay. We use Global Foundries in upstate New York. So we have 10 people and 10 shipping container sized semiconductor manufacturing tools. We've spent over $100 million over the last 8 years or so to establish that manufacturing process at GF. That's an enormous tier one semiconductor foundry. I think 450,000 square foot single span room full of tools, like many billions of dollars of semiconductor manufacturing. That's where our silicon comes from. And then we use the Stanford Linear Accelerator on Sand Hill Road. So a lot of VCs endlessly drive up and down Sand Hill Road without realizing.
This was really cool.
Yeah, so right opposite Lightspeed
Yeah.
is the Stanford Linear Accelerator. I think you had not seen it.
I
right?
had
Like,
no
I hope you
idea.
don't mind
And then
me
you
saying
showed
that.
me on Google Maps.
Yeah. So people live
Mhm.
in Silicon Valley their whole life.
Have no idea there's an alien structure there.
By the way, they never see a wafer. Every time I show people a wafer, they're like, why is it round? And I'm like, you're Silicon Valley. Like,
Oh
what are
my
you doing?
God.
You haven't seen a silicon wafer. You've never touched a silicon wafer. So that's that. And then people drive around in Silicon Valley and they don't know that there's a 2-mile long linear accelerator carving through some of the most expensive real estate in the United States that's, visible from space, immediately visible on Google Maps, and cuts under 280. So when you drive down 280, and there'll be a lot of people listening who drive down 280 every day and who have never looked right at just the right moment to see a very surreal looking object that stretches off into the distance. That's the Stanford Linear Accelerator. It used to be the longest building in the world, just sort of heading down towards Woodside. There's a 36,000 watt liquid helium cryo plant on that site. So 30,000 square foot industrial facility. And that's making helium at deep space temperature. So at minus 270 degrees, just over the street from light speed. Most people don't even have any. So when we were raising money, when we were raising Series A,
Mhm.
myself and my co-founder would ride our bikes up and down Sandhill trying to find a Series A term sheet. And it didn't cross our minds that there's kilowatts of liquid helium over the street. But we now have hardware on the concrete there. So we have some of our one of our cabinets right now installed at Slack and up and running and
How do
supporting
you
chips.
get that? Like, how do you secure that?
We are very
space?
grateful for our partnership with the Stanford Linear Accelerator and Department of Energy, and they've been really gracious. They had some spare helium. So that's a huge, like, loud industrial facility that's making very large volumes of helium
Expensive.
to run the LINAC. We're tapping off just a little tiny piece of that to evaluate our system. But it's pretty exciting because that is the same scale of cryoplant that we will now put into Australia and Chicago. And the cabinet that we use is pretty close to the real form factor. So it's like a 3-ton, 2-meter high stainless steel fridge, basically, that keeps our chips cold. It gets away from the chandelier. So I think when you say quantum computing, a lot of people immediately visualize the beautiful golden chandelier. We got rid of that. That goes in the trash, and we have these like much more boring cryostats. But yeah, we're very grateful to Slack for letting us squat in their building and steal a bit of helium. And then yeah, the main event is going to be in Australia first. So Australia is going to have the first very large scale machine just outside Brisbane Airport. And then the site in Chicago used to be the US Steel site. So it was a linchpin of US industrial might during the Second World War. Used to make 1 million tons of steel a year. Enormous steel foundry. That site has been empty for a few decades, and obviously, used to be furnished with enormous amounts of power, water, etc. We're just thrilled to be the anchor tenant of that site, to be breaking ground this year on these big systems, and to be surrounded by people in Australia and Chicago who are world-class, scientific expertise in quantum computing, error correction, etc., but also like bias to action and bravery. So in Chicago, they reversed the flow of the river to make it flow out of the lake. They lifted entire city blocks off of the ground like it's nothing. Like we need to be surrounded by people with that kind of mentality when we're, forging ahead with the kind of aggression that PsiQuantum has.
Okay. I'm just really curious in the theme of reindustrialization. I think Global Foundries is probably one of the most underrated companies in America.
Yeah.
Could you share more about your work with them and how they operate?
Yeah. So again, like this is to the theme, which is that I'm still amazed that people are not more intensely focused on this thing that power is being captured on the frontier of advanced technology. Still, when you talk about, these very advanced technologies, quantum computing, semiconductor manufacturing, etc., still people's eyes glaze over a little bit, and it's like you need to get with the times. Like 10 years ago, if you put a silicon wafer in front of the average politician, they didn't know what they were looking at. They'd never even heard of a semiconductor fab, and certainly they didn't care at all about semiconductor manufacturing. Now it's on everyone's lips. Everyone understands that the fact that TSMC is located in Taiwan is geopolitically profoundly impactful. Politicians even now know where ASML is and why ASML matters. Like, that's an upgrade. That's very welcome. And I've forgotten the question. Sorry.
Why is Global
Oh yeah,
Foundries
GF.
underrated?
Yeah, that's right. So now,
Mhm.
like, politicians and investors and so on cleanly understand that you have this kind of concentration of power into a few companies, a few bleeding edge technologies, and surprisingly small pieces of land. Like, it's shocking
Yeah.
if you just think about how much land does TSMC occupy, how much land does GF occupy, and the same goes for AI supercomputers. The same goes for rocket companies. These are incredibly consequential companies, and it's like a tiny plot of land. Like, you can barely even see it on the map. And so, yeah, semiconductor manufacturing is firmly in that category. In the United States, we have Intel, of course, and they've been in the news, I heard, recently. But GF is really the last remaining pure play semiconductor, like tier one semiconductor foundry in the United States. So we offshored huge fractions of our semiconductor industry as far as like a high volume 300 millimeter foundry that is making chips for industrial applications and for sort of high volume. GF is it. They're the last remaining capability. They're in upstate New York. And
What's their facility like?
so it's this enormous fab, right? Like, we have been working with GF so just zooming out, right? Like, if you want to make chips, you can make chips in a university clean room. I just saw this morning somebody who's made a fab in their garden shed, and that's brilliant for my narrative.
wow.
Because now you can literally make chips in your garden shed, but the quality of chip that you're going to make is very, very far removed from what you need for a useful application. And so there are tiers of fab, and you basically want to be in a big fab if you want to have good uniformity, if you want to have high device performance, and if you want a promise that you can make thousands of chips that are all the same. You need to be in a tier one fab. There are very few tier one fabs on the planet. TSMC, Global Foundries, Samsung, Intel, SMIC in China. There's a few others, but they're very limited, and GF is one of those. Their facility in upstate New York is a huge clean room. So, you gown up and put a mask on and so on. And then there are just multi-$100 million semiconductor manufacturing tools stretching as far as the eye can see. It takes 25 minutes to walk from one corner of the room to the other corner of the room. Wow. And so we had been working with these guys for like 5 or 6 years before they let me in the building. They finally let me go in there. And I've been talking about it and raging about, the semiconductor industry as leverage to get us to big machines quickly. This has been the sort of religious belief of PsiQuantum for many years. And actually getting in that building for the first time was a religious experience. Unbelievable, just scale and dynamic range, right? Like, they're making things with angstrom control on the thickness, so sub-nanometer control on thickness. And then this thing, it takes 25 minutes to walk across. You've got boiling sulfuric acid. You've got wafers at thousands of degrees Celsius. You've got liquid helium at minus 270. And obviously, like, I'm confident in what we're doing. I've been doing this my whole adult life, but occasionally I worry about the difficulty of building a quantum computer, and going to that fab was hugely encouraging, because you look at what humans have been able to do in a tier one foundry like that, and it makes almost everything else that we do as human beings look pathetic by comparison. It's unbelievable, the precision, the control, the extreme nature of everything that they're doing in that facility. And yeah, GF is a trusted fab. They make silicon for for defense applications. They make a ton of silicon for industry. And it's really like a point of pride that we're in there. Like when I say quantum computing, again, naturally people, their brain immediately goes to a physicist in a university research lab making some crappy like demo device, which is what we were all doing, 5 or 10 years ago. It's quantum computing and tier one foundry don't naturally belong in the same sentence. Like there's a parallel universe in which we went to GF 6 years ago, 7 years ago. It was pretty daunting, right? To show up on the front door of a facility like this, a legendary company, and say, hey, I'm a graduate student. I want to put superconductors into your factory, please. I'm going to put quantum computing devices into your factory. There's a parallel universe in which they called security and said, there's some mad people at the front door. Please have them removed from the property. And I'm glad that they didn't. And now that puts us, shoulder to shoulder with people who are routinely making tens of thousands of wafers, millions of chips. And that's always been critical to our approach.
What's so astonishing is like you have laid out such a complex supply chain and so many different touch points of just one company. How many jobs do you think this will create if, quantum does really work?
Yeah, so we've shared some job numbers in Australia and Chicago, and that's really, pretty specifically to support the sites that are getting built. So that's a data center like facility. You can't build and operate something like that without hundreds of people. But that is a very reductive way of looking at the jobs that are created by what we're doing. I don't want to be a pessimist, but again, coming back to some of our earlier discussion, to me, it looks as though humanity is rapidly moving forwards on this trajectory of pushing the boundary of what we can do with advanced technology. And there are real risks that you stop, right? Like there are real risks that you run into a barrier of power or cooling or space or computational mode of operation that means that you stop innovating or you stop pushing that boundary. And so I have no idea how you quantify the impact on the economy and jobs in that situation. But what we're trying to do is build a machine that allows us to continue on that trajectory as a nation, as a species. And if you want to grow an economy, it seems to me that you want advanced technology. And so that's obviously a very broad macroscopic view on things, but that's really how I see it. If we continue to use the same old petrochemicals, certainly the same semiconductor manufacturing processes, the same fuels, the same drugs, if we just stuck on that for the next decade, that's not a healthy situation for an economy.
Yeah, I was talking with Pri about this, and not to quote her, but some are expecting over 50,000 jobs created in areas of quantum manufacturing, from chips to cryogenics.
Yeah.
And that's before counting the scientists and the technologists.
So like 80% of our supply chain is in the United States. We have hundreds of companies in that supply chain here in the US. And we have obviously a further worldwide supply chain. So I don't know the exact number, but it's hundreds and hundreds of companies that we already work with.
Number.
That'll already extend to thousands of people who are involved in working on parts for our systems. And that's only going to grow. And of course, but again, I think that all pales in comparison to the broader context, which is that how do you assign the number of jobs that we have now, that how do you try to estimate the number of jobs that are in the US, let's say today, that wouldn't exist had we not come up with high performance computing? So the ability to simulate new fuels, especially things like fluid dynamics, design of aircraft, all of the stuff that we conventionally do with with high performance computing. Erase that from history, right? Like go back in time and say we never invented supercomputers. What impact would that have on the number of jobs in the United States? I have no idea, but it's catastrophic to our progress as a species. So yeah, I don't know. It's difficult to estimate, but.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen quantum get framed politically over and over again as kind of like a scare tactic.
Yeah.
Everything from cybersecurity, code breaking, China, and just these like overall doom narratives. So how much of this is hype and PR versus genuine interest and progress?
If you build a big enough quantum computer, you can break most of the encryption, public key encryption that we currently use on the internet. That's a fact. And actually, there was a recent paper which reduces the resources required to do this quite significantly. So that is a widely publicized prospect that a big quantum computer is going to let you break encryption and read secrets. And that's completely real. There is a sort of cringeworthy thing that people do where it's just so transparent that they just imagine a big lever that says China on it. And people like me who want money, they think you just pull the lever and money comes out. Just say China, 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 and then imagine that money is just flying to the company through this mechanism. Like it's kind of cringeworthy and a bit lame, if you ask me. Like the thing that to me is clear is like just a slightly different framing on that. Do you want your nation to be on the frontier of advanced technology? Like, do you want your nation to have the best technology? That seems like quite a straightforward question to answer. And so, like, the risk is real. Like, there is a clear technical basis for these concerns. I think sometimes the way people wield that as a sort of marketing tool is a little bit unfortunate. And then the good news on that is that, as far as we understand, still, despite these new architectural results, algorithmic results, you still need a bigger computer to do code breaking than you do to tackle the commercially useful applications that we talked about earlier. So that's good for us because I want to be rich. And as far as we know, we're going to get rich before we get dangerous. You can imagine a parallel world where, for whatever reason, nature conspired such that we get dangerous before we get rich, right? Like if the number of qubits and gates needed to break encryption was really small, it'd be really annoying because I'd have to deal with all of those like frightening geopolitical implications before I can even buy my Ferrari. Fortunately, it's the other way around. So you should get like an economic early warning sign, essentially, where you should see quantum computing companies doing commercially impactful things, making money, and then eventually scaling towards systems that are big enough to be cryptographically relevant. So hopefully that helps people to sleep at night a little bit. But yeah, there is absolutely serious technical reality to these things. Sometimes they're wielded in a slightly silly way.
You've definitely got some support from the public side and government, but has the public side been overall very supportive to this industry?
Yeah, so I think sometimes people are surprised to see like BlackRock and Baillie Gifford and people like that on our cap table. Obviously, like those guys, that category of late stage crossover type people, they were in SpaceX, they were in Nvidia, they were in ASML when ASML was a pretty crazy prospect. And again, like just look at that list of companies. Like it's not, I don't think it's as surprising as people make out. And with quantum computing, like there is this sort of additional mystique. Every time you talk to people, they kind of give up before they've even started, right? Like they say, oh, quantum computing, I can never understand this. It's just crazy, it's spooky action at a distance and so on and so on. I'll never understand the physics. I can't engage. When I talk to people like that, I sort of like to, my co-founder particularly likes to make the point that if you go to the average technology conference, you'll find thousands of people who are very comfortable talking about GPUs and, you know, transistors and 3 nanometer and so on and so on. And then you ask these people, okay, like you love AI, you love computers, you love GPUs. Please get on the whiteboard and explain to me how a transistor works. Like, talk me through Fermi levels and electron hole pairs and the physics of a transistor. And it's like hopeless, right? Like 99% of people, most physicists can't give you a really good explanation of how a transistor works. It's pretty bloody involved physics. And so the fact that a, late stage crossover investor, whatever, is looking at quantum computing, you can't rebut that from the point of view that, the physics of the device is involved. The same is true of transistors, right? Like, there's nothing unusual about that, really. And so, yeah, we're delighted to have that support. BlackRock and various of those people have been supporters of the company for many, many years now. They came in at Series C, and then, it's been nice to be able to show them that we've done the things we said we were going to do with their capital, and to have them continue to support the company over years like this has been very gratifying to me. Yeah.
So I've heard I'm going to go put on a bunny suit tomorrow.
Yeah.
What is going on at this facility?
Yeah, so this is the facility that I didn't mention in my long list of locations, but this is also in the South Bay here. We've been missing a piece, basically. So
Okay.
hopefully I've given you a good sales pitch that we've got the chip manufacturing at a high level of maturity, and we threw away the chandelier and we're building these parts. We needed to switch light, like route light, with incredibly high performance. This isn't really a quantum problem, it's just an optics problem. But to do that, we had to make a new material. And so this was sort of, again, like outlier to the standard approach where we're trying to use existing stuff. We were forced to do something pretty unusual. This was a big piece of like the risk that we went after with our Series D fundraise. And so we told BlackRock and co, don't worry, we got it covered. We're just going to occupy an empty building in San Jose. We're going to build 5 clean rooms in there. We're going to put the biggest molecular beam epitaxy tool in the world ever in that facility. It's never been built before. The vendor, by the way, thinks it's a terrible idea for us to do this and it's not going to work. Various of our employees think it's not going to work. And then what we're going to do is we're going to have molten titanium at a few thousand degrees Celsius. We're going to have liquid helium at minus 270 degrees, same temperature as deep space. We're going to expose them to the same vacuum chamber, and then we're going to grow essentially perfect material that nobody else can make on a giant wafer. We're going to do it clean enough that we can then FedEx that up to New York to put into Global Foundries, and then we're going to have our device. And the shipping company actually dropped the main chamber, I think up in Alameda, and broke it during COVID.
Oh my God.
So we had some drama in bringing that thing online. But yeah, huge risk for the company, new material science, never before demonstrated tool, requirement to get that into the highest level of maturity of chip manufacturing that exists, and a lot of trust put in us by those Series D investors. And it's just been a wonderful thing. So we now make that material with essentially perfect properties. We ship it off to GF, we integrate it into the flow, and we make these switches. And we need that for quantum computing. They're beyond state of the art in performance. They're published in Nature a few months ago. But when we published that paper in Nature, I think it was something like 14 regular optical networking and semiconductor companies rang up Global Foundries asking how they could get access to that material, because it is basically the strongest optical material known to science.
Mm-hmm.
We're the only people in the world who make that on a 300 millimeter wafer. So you're going to go and see that tool and get in the clean room. And if our yield goes down, or if our quality goes down in a few weeks' time, I'll know who to blame.
It'll be me. So, like, logistically, this might be a dumb question, but do you need like armored cars to ship this across America? Like, it gets bumpy. How do you ship these?
We
FedEx?
FedEx.
Just like a straight up FedEx truck?
Yeah. The semiconductor industry is pretty amazing. There's a lot that goes under the hoods that would blow people's minds. I mean, we're also, so that material is a very special material.
Mm-hmm.
There are a few other people who make it around the world, but we're the only people who make it on a big wafer like this. But then that's getting integrated with other components at Global Foundries that we also design, and where our team is located in the fab doing that development. I was very gratified when invited to go and testify to Congress to be able to tell them that our company has spent north of $100 million on sovereign semiconductor manufacturing in the United States. And a lot of that has been those components at GF. And all of that stuff has to work in concert. So like, you know, PsiQuantum is obviously a company that has to take security really, really seriously. Quantum computing is a dual use, sovereign, strategic capability. We red team our IT systems. We leave USB sticks in the parking lot. We work with the 3-letter agencies. We do, you know, all of the, you know, basic hygiene and steps that you would imagine that we take. And that helps me to sleep at night. But the thing that really helps me sleep at night is that we are ahead on a really, really complex, incredibly technically challenging technology. And you've seen actually some of these companies, they publish their patents, right? Like you saw that from Elon a few years back. That's a familiar kind of stance to me, because we have a ton of IP. The IP is awesome, but really the thing that makes me feel strong is that we're the only company in the world who is actually capable of executing on this stuff. We're ahead, and we've got our foot on the gas pedal, not least thanks to this recent funding round. So, you know, in addition to all of that kind of hygiene and security work, the main responsibility on the company is just to be ahead, move faster, execute better. And so, currently we're able to do that on that material and on those devices. Yeah.
So what is PsiQuantum's role in reindustrialization?
Yeah, so I think twofold. Firstly, we're actually doing it today. We're laying concrete, cutting steel, building parts in concert with hundreds of companies here in the United States, 80% US-based supply chain, everything from the angstrom to the kilometer, right? Like we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars making chips, making big metal boxes, flowing helium, doing, you know, breakthrough work on quantum algorithms and quantum error correction. Very high dynamic range. Like that's one of the joys of the company, is that we have everything from extremely rare, elite, mathematically oriented people who do the algorithms and architecture work, through to people who are, you know, laying 100,000 square feet of concrete and putting walls up, everything in between. We're doing that today. We're not just talking about it in the future. Like we already do that stuff. We just tore up the floor here in the South Bay. We just had a cryo plant arrive, which I think maybe you're going to see later today or hopefully soon. We've put 10 shipping container semiconductor manufacturing tools into GF. Like we're doing it. We've already done it. But then, yeah, in the future context, again, we really hope that the quantum computer is this kind of fountain of knowledge, engine for innovation that allows this country and our species to move forwards beyond what otherwise I think look like boundaries to continued progress. If we can't deterministically design the microscopic foundations of our world, I think it's really difficult to just continue. And we see that so clearly with semiconductors, right? Like we're coming to the end of Moore's law. We cannot make smaller transistors. That's going to get really, really painful in the next decade. And so a future industrial environment, I think, is hugely benefited by the existence of a big quantum computer.
I want to talk a little bit about your sanity through all of this, because this is
based on the previous 90 minutes of discussion.
Yeah. I'm a little concerned.
Yeah.
No, but so
am I, actually.
You are?
A little bit, yeah.
Why?
You only get one reference point in life, you know? Like this has been my entire adult life. When I start talks these days, like public talks, I like to start by showing an image of a black hole. It's a beautiful, historic image of a simulated black hole that was done by a French gentleman, Jean-Pierre Lumiere. And that was done on an IBM punch card computer. So there was no display on these systems. You look at this image and it's clearly hand painted. So this French guy got hold of an IBM punch card machine and spent presumably a very long time feeding punch cards in, getting numbers out, and then with a paintbrush and India ink and a canvas, painting the data that was coming out of the system. And it's this stunning picture of a black hole, very similar to the images that you see in Interstellar, but done decades prior, and of course decades before human beings ever actually saw a black hole directly. Must have been astonishing feeling to see that image appear. But I show that both as a sort of testament to the power of seemingly primitive computers. You know, that's a really primitive looking machine relative to what we have on our desk today. But it's still showing us a glimpse of something, you know, unfathomably far away in our universe. But also as a sort of allegory for the way that quantum computing has acted on the lives of people like me. It's very rare that you have a technical goal like this, where quantum computing has already consumed billions and billions and billions of dollars of capital. It has consumed the entire adult life of tens of thousands of our best scientists and researchers. Sum total has got to be nearly 100,000 years of human life, billions of capital, and inordinate amount of time has been thrown into the pit of quantum computing. And it's a sinister, I show it deliberately as a sinister image, right? Like, so far we have made this huge investment and we don't have useful quantum computers today. We know that it's possible to build these machines. Like, it is definitely physically possible. And so, I feel a huge responsibility that we make this successful. And I'm very lucky that we have a real shot on goal to do it. But yeah, it's a big responsibility and a pretty weird technology to be involved in. I think, one thing that really helps with the sanity is that, like so many things, you can look at quantum computing through two lenses. One lens is, this is alien technology from outer space, baffling physics, spooky action at a distance, mysterious, etc., etc. And then there's another perspective that I think is pretty helpful, which is, what are we really doing? And especially when you talk to people and they say, like, why in Brisbane, Australia? Or they say, why in Chicago? And to those people, I always sort of say, like, what are we doing? We're building a big computer, big, ugly building scale computer. We're building it through collaboration of private industry and public funds. And we're doing it outside of the capital city of the nation, right? Like, you're not building it in downtown Washington, DC or Times Square or something. You're building it somewhere else. And it's going to be operated by scientists, and it's going to give us a view into the future of what we do with technology. That story is a story that's decades old. People have been building leadership class supercomputers for a very long time. And usually people don't care about them, and that's fine. Like, nobody cared prior to GPT-3. Nobody cared that Azure and Microsoft and OpenAI were building big, ugly computers. Like, nobody even thought about that. They only care about the output. And so for the average person, I hope that they never care about our quantum computer, that they never even think that there's this pretty nondescript looking warehouse sitting out there next to the airport or on the south side of Chicago. But I really hope that one day they use a drug or a fuel or a fertilizer or a material or some technology that simply would not have existed without the lens and the simulation capability that quantum computing is going to give us.
Rex, since you're such a big fan, and I think you're converting over pretty soon, they're all about spending smarter, moving faster. How have you as a company thought about doing all of these things in the most efficient way possible? How do you think about performance as a company?
Back to the 80s, Silicon Valley hardware company DNA. Bad coffee, polystyrene ceiling tiles, dilapidated former conference rooms converted to lab space. Like, to me, as a immigrant to Silicon Valley, that stuff is so cool. That stuff is like legendary, right? Like that you walk into some space that isn't polished and beautiful with a, $10,000 coffee machine and bean bags and massages, but you walk into somewhere pretty grim and find the most astonishing technology being built by the most legendary people. Like that ethos is embedded in PsiQuantum, partly deliberately and partly simply by virtue of being a chip company. I think that kind of comes with the territory to some extent, because chip manufacturing is bloody expensive. I think more recently we have a bit more scope than that. Like we have a little bit more dynamic range. Obviously, we now have this wonderful new facility in the South Bay that is a massive order of magnitude step up from where we have been for the last 8 years. And then we don't only do chips. We also have algorithms people, we have theory people, we have special people at the company. But yeah, to me, it's pretty cool to have that kind of pretty thrifty, pretty modest approach to our environment in which we're operating. I think that's it's traditional for hardware companies.
And what's your favorite flavor of chip that you make?
So actually, I don't know whether this is public or not. It's probably not. I have to save that one. Favorite flavor of chip? We did actually have a visitor who will remain nameless but knows who he is, who came to see the BTO wafer. So the BTO wafer, you're going to see it tomorrow. It's just a blue disc, but the blue on that disc is a very special blue. It's made with the strongest electro-optic material known to science, and that's a really special object, right? Like there are very few of those ever been made in the world, and took us a ton of blood, sweat, and tears to be able to make that. After this visitor came, he left and texted. I think he tweeted that he'd just seen the wafer, and then he was asking the internet whether he should have licked it or not.
Oh my God.
And we're never letting him back in the building, unfortunately. But
Oh.
I think it's probably fine. So you could find out.
If he licked it or
No,
not?
you can find out how BTO tastes.
Oh. I could do a taste test.
You could do a taste test for
We
yourself.
could line them up.
Yeah. There is the obviously the human taste capability is borderline science fiction in terms of like how good it is, and
This is how you do quality
comprehension
testing.
and so on. Yeah.
Mhm.
No, I mean, I just like, you asked about my sanity earlier, right? Like I came out here a decade ago and I fully expected to be sent home packing with a failed company 6 months later.
Mhm.
And I've never done this before. I've never founded a company before. The only real job I've ever had is stacking compost in a garden center. And so it is daunting to me to go to like the biggest pure play foundry in the United States, to go to the BlackRocks and, all of this stuff that is just so far from my prior experience, and make these claims. Yeah, we're going to put superconductors into a commercial semiconductor foundry. It's going to be fine. We're going to build this clean room and we're going to grow epitaxial barium titanate on a silicon wafer. This architecture is like 10,000 times too bad right now, but we're just going to make it better at a geometric rate for 7 years running. Don't worry, the next 7 years, we're just going to progressively make that architecture better. We're going to keep innovating, whatever. Like, it's daunting to make those claims. And it is a, personal joy and treat to be able to then come back to those people a few years later and say that we actually did it. So when I look at those wafers that you've seen in our facility, and I think about the fact that there's 35 layers of stuff on that wafer, that there's a superconducting material inside, and that it was made in a commercial foundry next to regular chips. Yeah, it's a pretty special feeling. I love that stuff. It's awesome.
I have to ask you the question you don't want to be asked.
Please.
When do you think the first useful quantum computer will be developed?
Yeah, so it's a great question. I would ask people not to try to nail it down to the week, which they sometimes do. Like, get real. This is a big,
Get
very
real.
difficult infrastructure project.
We need to get down to the
The
day.
plan of record that the company marches to is that we want to have that site enabled by end of 2027 in Australia. That's what we march people to. That is an incredibly difficult thing to do. That's a really aggressive timeline. But we've done well as a company historically by driving people to, the most aggressive timeline that we can reasonably stomach. And that's what Silicon Valley companies do. That's part of the value proposition of a startup, is that we're willing to try to do things extremely quickly. And we have done that historically. If you look at claims that we've made about standing up a completely new manufacturing flow at GF, or standing up this BTO material, or building these high power cryostats, I keep a pretty good record of claims that we've made historically. And I think we do a pretty good job of sticking to those claims, especially given the novelty and the difficulty and so on of what we do. But then also to rationalize that claim, again, I'd go back to Jensen's comment, right? Like, okay, you got to scale up by 10,000x, that's 20 or 30 years. XAI, Colossus supercomputer, built in 112 days, kind of bigger system than what we're building in many ways. We're not going to build this thing in 112 days, obviously. We know limits on the speed with which we can commission the cryo plant and, various other sort of constraints. But, going 5 or 10 times slower than that sounds pretty reasonable to me. And that's essentially what we're trying to do. If you think about that timeline, I don't know, 6 times slower or something than Elon, that feels like a reasonable ambition for a company like ours.
It was funny. I tweeted out this Kalshi market, which currently has before 2027 at 18%, 2030 at 30%, 2035 at 45%, and before 2040 at 55%. And one of the comments on it was by Martin Shkreli.
Yeah.
And he said, as the CEO of Rigetti famously said, define useful.
Yeah. So, I mean, like, defining useful, capitalism has a pretty helpful assist on that, which is that when you're making a ton of revenue, you're probably doing something that, within reason you could call useful. And like $1 billion of revenue would be a nice starting point for a useful machine like this. Yeah, definitely what is not useful is pure pedagogical science, like learning, which is what people are currently doing with quantum computers. It's valuable, it's important to move towards useful machines, but it's not commercially useful. And that's what we mean by useful. But also, like, the Polymarket, it's on Polymarket.
No, it's on Kalshi.
What?
They have a big rivalry.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay. Kalshi. Well, I would have loved to see, I think they didn't have Kalshi or Polymarket before, like, they didn't have those. What did they exist prior? Well, they
Prediction
weren't
markets?
they weren't like popular prior to like GPT-3 or prior to Waymo
No,
becoming
like,
real. I think
Kalshi just first got regulated like in the last year.
Yeah. I mean, people were talking about it decades ago, obviously, but like this wave of people really using those systems, I think it would have been fascinating to see what that looked like if you ask people about the Turing test, for instance, prior to GPT-3, or if you ask them about self-driving 5 years ago, I guess, would have been pretty interesting to see what people say.
Dialing into Nvidia and how Jensen apologized.
I'm not sure he actually apologized.
He walked back on his comments of when he thinks the timeline for quantum will actually come to pass. And I think one of the interesting points that I gleaned from that is he seemed to be confused. And so he actually positioned it as more of like a branding and marketing problem for quantum. And I think like this new wave of AI and technology and frontier tech that is taking on a new language and marketing positioned is probably like an opportunity for more language in quantum. I don't know if that makes sense, but to quote him, he said, I do wonder whether quantum computing is simply poorly positioned because it was described as a quantum computer instead of a quantum instrument, which is a little
Yeah.
bit contentious for some people. And then he added, there's a common sense about what a computer is. It has to have memory, it has to have networks, it has to have storage.
hmm
It should be able to read and write, but there's a programming model associated with computers. I wonder if it's just a wrong mental model. What do you think about the positioning of quantum as it's evolved through time, and how should it be labeled today?
I think that Jensen's use of the word instrument is very well is very sensible, and it's pretty instructive actually. When people think of computer, like the average person, they think of laptop, cell phone, something like that. The applications of quantum computing are similar to the applications of high performance computing. They're about seeing into the future, or about seeing into some system that you otherwise can't access. And so thinking about a quantum computer as a telescope or a lens or an instrument or a measuring device or something, that's a very helpful analogy just to differentiate from PowerPoint and Microsoft Excel and TikTok, right? Like it's really got nothing to do with that stuff. Although TikTok would be quantum TikTok would be really good. But yeah, so I think that's and I've said earlier, I really worry that CEOs of these hyperscalers and leadership of here in Silicon Valley, I worry that they're going to get completely detached from reality on what quantum computing is for. And I've actually been honestly pretty impressed that they know you need about 1 million qubits. They know you need error correction. They know that it's not for PowerPoint and Excel. They understand, and these guys have got 20 other things of extreme high priority that they need to be thinking about. So I'm actually pretty relaxed that they basically understand the nature of what's going on. The same maybe cannot be said for some of the public market investors, and it's pretty striking, let's say, that there are now public quantum computing companies where anybody can get a view. But the other thing on that is that, so I'm fully on board with the instrument language.
Okay.
I think that's really, really helpful. As far as marketing of quantum computing and positioning and so on, again, I'll just emphasize that the number of people who directly interface with the products of TSMC, ASML, SpaceX, Nvidia, like how many people do a tape out at TSMC, how many people run an ASML EUV machine, is a minuscule number of people. And so there are these giant companies where their contact point with the outside world is incredibly narrow. We are categorically one of those companies. The downstream effects we think are profound, but the direct interaction with the company is very narrow. And so I would love to be able to do this without any publicity. It'd be awesome, right? Like, it feels as though you should be able to develop technologies like this and get them funded and get them built without some giant marketing campaign. And we generally have, bias towards not spending a lot of time on TV and in the newspapers. But quantum computing is also so kind of thought-provoking and exciting to people, and we think, ultimately, profoundly impactful and determining factor in all sorts of things, that there's no getting away from the fact that people really care about it and they want to understand it and they want to hear about it. And so, messaging it carefully is a sacred responsibility that falls on leaders of these companies, people like myself, etc. It's a delicate thing to get right. Yeah.
As we wrap up, what are you most looking forward to in the next year?
In the next year,
Mm-hmm.
hopefully we'll break ground on these sites. That's going to be a pretty special experience, having been thinking about building these systems for 15 plus years of my life and 20 plus years of my co-founders' lives. To actually be able to point at the piece of land where we're building these systems is going to be special. And then also, as I said, we've up until very recently been kind of grinding away in a pretty small, not fit for purpose kind of space, suddenly expanded into this much bigger facility. And so that is now just like a engine of activity, hive of activity. That's just thrilling to be close to that. Like, it was completely empty 6 months ago. We've now got a cryo plant there. We've ripped up the floor. We've laid concrete. We're putting fiber attach tools into a clean room space. Suddenly there's 100+ people in the building, like just seeing the pace of that. And, I've been doing this for a long time. It's very difficult. You're always staring, at the top of Everest, and in moments of depression or frustration or whatever, always the good thing to do is just go to the lab, go and see the people who are actually doing stuff. It always cheers me up. They always have something that I didn't know they were doing. And, one of the exciting things about quantum computing for me is that when I look at conventional computing, as we've discussed, it looks as though there is still some life in it. There's still great progress to be made, but it is also clearly coming to the end of life, right? Like, Moore's law is over. We're turning on nuclear power stations. That'll get us so far, but how much further can we go with conventional computing? It looks a little worrying. And this year, Jensen will build an AI supercomputer, and he'll look back on that 10 years from now and say, that's a pretty good system. Like, it's a pretty badass system. With quantum computing, we're really at the very beginning. We're really early. And so when we build our parts for our systems today, when we build those systems in Australia and Chicago, we're going to look back on that 2 years in, and we're going to say, man, those were horrible systems. Why did we design it like that? This was completely, inefficient use of space or power or whatever. And we're already thick into that, which to me looks like the early days of the microelectronics industry, or of mainframes, or of conventional computing, where every month you're looking at what you did the previous month and saying that was stupid. We should make it smaller. We should make it higher density. We can reduce errors. So to be on a gradient like that is life-giving and privilege. Yeah.
That's a great answer. Well, Pete, it was a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you so much, Molly. I really appreciate it. It's great
we
questions.
Didn't have to refill the batteries every so often. We could just keep on going.
Yeah.
Do you think you have it in you?
What if it's lunchtime? Get some lunch and then crack back on.
Might as well.
Great.
Well, thank you so much for coming on, and congratulations on the announcement and the big funding.
It. Thank you.
It's huge.
Privilege.
Hey, it's Molly. If you enjoy our interviews, check out our newsletter, sorcery.vc, where we deliver a once-a-week top deals and tech headlines email, and also go deeper on our podcast interviews. Subscribe to Sorcery today. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, or wherever you listen. Link in description to sign up.